We're here to celebrate the show, or celebrate or honor, whatever the right word is, this exhibition of Stephen Hayes' work. I've been here at the gallery 20 years, and so I've had the privilege of working with Stephen for 20 years, but Stephen has actually been showing with the gallery since 1986. So I don't know what this is, almost 40 years, or maybe it's, almost 40 years, because the gallery's approaching its 45th anniversary. This is his 24th solo show with the gallery in that time. So we have had the opportunity, as have many, yes, please. So many of us have had the opportunity to see many of his exhibitions, which is a real pleasure. As myself and many of you know, he is really well known both regionally and nationally, including actually some internationally, for his abstracted landscapes, which I like to describe as capturing the essence of a place rather than exactly what it looks like. And as you can see looking around, what we're standing in is a bit different than that. And I think if you've been following his work for those 40 years, or 20 or whatever you've been following, you have seen him reinvent his creative practice on a number of occasions. This is not the first time he has reinvented his practice in some way. And I think that takes a real bravery and trust in your creative endeavors to do that. And so we're really proud to be showing a body of work that is, I think, very much in line with what I have seen from Stephen Hayes before, but different in a few essential ways. And that is something that I'm really proud to present, because I think it just shows that he's an artist who consistently demonstrates bravery in his practice. I think these paintings are somewhat similar in the sense that they are about the essence of something, but I think these are about the essence of emotion rather than the essence of a place. And so that is a bit different, but he will speak to that. You're here to hear them talk about it and not me. So joining Stephen today is David Naimon, who is a literary podcaster, among many other things. His podcast is called Between the Covers. It is done by Tin House Media here in Portland, but it has been promoted far wider by media like The Guardian and BuzzFeed. I believe they can speak to this maybe better than I, but I believe their conversation, Stephen and David's conversation, began after a podcast on the book One Day Everyone Will Always Have Been Against This by Omar El-Akkad, and who's, I believe, a Portland author. And I heard that podcast and a number of others. And one of the things that David does that's so beautiful is he does a very long-form literary interview. And so we're very excited to hear his take on visual art. But I think the subject matter that began the conversation is so pertinent to this exhibition. They are a perfect pairing for this conversation. So if you'll join me in welcoming them, we'll just turn it over to them.
Well, first, I just want to thank the Elizabeth Leach Gallery and also Stephen. In the spirit of looking at how he reinvents his work over time, he said he wanted to do something different with his painting conversation around the exhibition than he usually does. And I imagine, not knowing, that usually he's probably with an art curator or with a painter peer rather than a literary podcaster. So we both sort of put ourselves in a situation that's new and unfamiliar to both of us in a sense. I'm normally talking to writers. Some of them occasionally are visual artists, and we talk about visual art, but we're usually talking about the visual art through language. So like my naive question when he first asked me, and I felt this sense of excitement and honor, but also fear and anxiety, was...
Goes both ways.
My naive question was going to be, which has sort of been the umbrella under which I've been thinking about a line of inquiry, what does it mean to make abstract art during an ongoing, urgent, unfolding political event that is engaging with it? But instead of asking that to start out with, I thought what we could do is start with what I imagine is the atmosphere or the climate of Stephen painting and how that atmosphere influenced choices he made in making the paintings. I mean, we all know that right now there's a lot of pressure on free speech, the stigmatization of certain types of speech, for instance, the journalists at the Washington Post who lost their job because of not mourning Charlie Kirk the right way. But it's particularly focused on Palestinian speech. We've seen tenured professors lose their jobs. We've seen student visas being revoked, people being deported. But that's only new in the sense that it's in the news now. It's actually been going on for decades. The Palestine Legal estimates there were 1,700 what they call suppression events between 2014 and 2020, which are events being canceled or reputations of people teaching certain things being tarnished. And I imagine, Stephen, working in this climate or breaking silence around this climate. And I know in a little bit we've talked about it. He talked about preparing the ground of the canvas in this climate and choices that were made based on the atmosphere. And I'd love, and I don't know how many people here would share this, to know more about preparing the ground of a canvas, just generally speaking, what are the choices that you do? And then what are the specific choices, given what the state of the world and what you're wanting to engage in it, that were made because of what's going on outside of the studio?
Well, thank you for asking right away one of the harder ones. I appreciate it. So, that's a multifaceted question that I'm getting from David. If I stick with just the most obvious, it is the physical preparation of materials and the collection of materials. And so for those of you who are painters or makers of things, you probably hopefully you relate to the decision that needs to be made at the outset. What scale am I going to work on? What am I going to make everything myself, or am I going to purchase pre-made things? How much am I going to rely on being in the process, and how important is the process to ultimately the end result? So for me, the process is always integral and integrated into the meaning of the work. And often I begin making work not knowing exactly what is going to happen with that work, but I have to make a decision about scale and proportion. So in this particular body of work, I didn't start off knowing what I was making when I made these works, but I knew I wanted to work on this scale and in these proportions. So I built the stretchers, the strainers, I stretched the canvas, I primed the canvases. And in talking with David about this, I didn't realize it at the time, but I realized that I did all of that in total silence this time. And that's not normal for me. That's not common for me. It's more common to have music blaring and be just enjoying the process and getting kind of lost in it. But I didn't do that for whatever reason. I didn't know what was going to happen with those. First, I made 6 canvases just because I work in a small studio that's about a quarter the size of this room to make these. And that's about the max I could ever have on the walls. Actually, I couldn't have all 6 up at the same time. And so I made 6 canvases, and they were up there. Ultimately, one day I went into work, and I thought I knew what I was going to do. And as soon as I started putting paint on the canvas, I realized that every time an image showed up, so you mentioned that, or Daniel mentioned that, landscape seems to be a thing that people know that I have done for a long time. Every time an image of landscape started to show up, I just scraped it off and wiped it out and pushed the paint around and got rid of it and would not let it arrive, would not let an image land. And so I went from canvas to canvas that way, just sort of pushing paint around and responding with a destructive force, my destructive force of imagery, every time it tried to show up. And in retrospect, of course, I think I know what I was doing was I was not finding the easy way in. Was not. I didn't know that this was the work I was moving toward. But I knew that this is not the time to be in a place of comfort. That's kind of what happened internally. So not a time to be in a place of habit, not a time to be in a place of comfort, not a time to think you know what the fuck you're doing. Just admit that we're in new territory. And a few months, I went through that, and then I realized, this is a body of work that's happening because of what's happening internally in my response to what's happening in the world, specifically what's happening in Gaza. I came to recognize that these were about what is happening there. They weren't about specific incidents, like this particular day or that particular event, but the general sense of, first of all, horror, confusion, sense of complicity, being, paying your estimated taxes and thinking like, no, I want this to go towards food, right? You think about, we all have to come to some kind of internal place with our reconciliation. Are we being complicit? Are we doing something about this? Are we being heard? So once I realized what I was doing here, and I knew this had to be a larger body of work. Plus, I had a scheduled show up. I thought this show was going to be some beautiful landscape paintings, So I went and built 6 more canvases and stretched 6 more canvases so that I could engage with a dozen canvases. And the number 12 turned out to be an important number in that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to let David ask another question.
Well, I remember, and this is going to show like my limitations of the right lexicon in talking about visual art. But I remember when we were having coffee, you talking about even choices before you start painting around preparing the canvas, like smooth versus rough, and how that was about the choices you made there had to do with acknowledging entering a fraught space with your work. Yeah. So again, if you're a painter and you know about preparing things, it does matter the surface that you work on. A painter, like I work on canvas, but I stretch it over board so that it's a really resistant surface. It doesn't bounce back and forth. It doesn't feel too fragile. And then the canvas needs to be protected with a gesso, to both provide a kind of brilliance of color, letting light travel through paint and reflect that color, but also to protect the canvas from erosion and the deleterious effects of oils. And when David and I met for coffee, we only met once prior to this. We don't have anything, I don't know what he's going to be asking me about. But one of the things we did talk about was it did seem important to me at the time to make sure that these canvases had multiple 3 or 4 coats of gesso on them with sand in between, so that they were really this kind of pure surface, and that the surface wasn't resistant. The surface wasn't imparting texture by itself. That they just were fully protected and fully virginal in a way, And again, it's not always the case when I prepare canvases for making paintings, but for some reason this time it seemed really clear that I needed to do that, not in a conscious way, and so I did that. Mm-hmm. So all of these have a slightly different kind of ground than I'm used to working on. It allows the paint to move around really quickly when you do it that way. If you do 1 coat, it's a really resistant thing. If you do 2 coats, it's a little bit less resistant. If you do 3 or 4 coats and sanding in between, it's a more skaters are going on there, and for some reason that seems necessary. Well, the painting behind us is probably the main reason I'm sitting in this chair today, which 11 of the paintings were done in silence. And this painting, the one that's white behind me, was done while listening to me in conversation with Omar El-Akkad, I think also with Isabella Hamad, and with Omar El-Akkad's audiobook.
Yes.
And it also, I believe, has the most symbolic, connotative underpainting of the 12 paintings, I suspect.
It's the only deliberate painting,
Yeah.
actually. None of these are deliberately made to look the way they look. All of them, except for this one, were made literally by just starting to paint, resisting imagery, covering things up, painting more, resisting imagery, covering things up. I mean, I think about all painting as abstract painting. Even the paintings that I make that have imagery in them, they're not the place, right? They're not the thing or the person. They're a simulacrum at best and a representation, or they make you think of, but they're an abstraction. And so these don't surprise me that imagery would disappear in this case. Imagery is not, for me, imagery is not my friend in these paintings. So I want to avoid that. But this painting began, as David said, it's the only one that I actually listened to anything, and it was his podcast, his interview with Omar El-Akkad, and also listening to Omar's book, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. And it occurred to me that I needed to have structure for this painting to become the painting it was going to become, so I gridded off the canvas. It's a 60-inch by 60-inch painting. I gridded off the canvas into 3-inch squares. So there was a 20 by 20 unit, 400 cell grid on the canvas. And just without hesitating in making it, I just mixed up a bunch of black paint. Actually, it's kind of olive green and black, and a bunch of different things in there, but it's black paint and a little brush about, a size 2, about the, I don't even know how to say that, about a 1/4-inch brush. And in the first cell in the upper left-hand corner, started making marks with the intention of making 100 marks in that little square, and then each one filled out so that the whole canvas would be covered with a black mark to the tune of 40,000 black marks. And every mark that was put down, I said it out loud. I didn't say names or anything like that, but it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, like this in a process, going almost into a trance, almost into a meditation. And it took quite a long time to cover that canvas with 40,000 black marks. And before I got to the end of covering that canvas, I realized that that wasn't going to be enough. So I put another 50 marks in each cell, so to the tune of 60,000 black marks on this cell. Again, counting 1, 2, 3, 4. And of course, very conscious of news reports of, this many are now killed, this many are now, so it finally, got filled up. And when it was filled up, it was like a catharsis in a way. It was almost like, it's one of the few times that I've actually ever cried in my studio. I had the thought, I'm just going to mix up a bunch of white paint and whitewash this out. I'm just going to cover this up, make a shroud for it, wipe it all out, wash it out. And that I resisted that urge and decided to make another 60,000 white marks on top of that. So I just regridded the canvas so that I could see where I was. I could orient myself. And you notice there's no horizon in any of these. There's no orientation in any of these. You can't find where you are in any of these. There's not sky and land. There's not footing, And so on this one, I needed to artificially impose footing, a way to find myself. And again, 1, 2, 3, so that each one of those black marks then had its own white mark. and you can make of that what you will. But it again, it wasn't the easy choice. It wasn't it would be easy to mix up a gallon of white paint and just paint it all over. It was the necessary process of you get this one, you get this one, you get this one, you get this one.
Well, my entryway, or the way that I found my way into thinking about visual art, is through poetry. I was happy that poetry's in the description. Poetry, prayer, and a placard were all connected to the Elegy description. But I think about a long-standing affinity between poetry and visual art. A lot of poets who come on the show are engaging in some relation with visual art. Some of them are visual artists, but they're coming on as poets, like Cecilia Vicuña or Jen Bervin. But there's also this sense of like working against the connotative aspect of language. So like foregrounding the visual of words on the page, but also the sonic qualities. So like, for instance, Robert Frost would talk about when you hear people on the other side of a wall and you can't make out any of the words, but you hear all the intonations, the volume, a sense of gesture, that's where the meaning is. And Virginia Woolf also had this phrase, the wave in the mind, and the words would come and fit into the wave, and that it's actually the wave, not the words, that is where the meaning is. And so it's a foregrounding of like a materiality of language, but also sort of working against something that we assume is the main focus of language. And I wanted to use that, I guess, as a frame to asking you some questions about how you work with or against materials also, and representation. Because I found this quote, I'm sure it's well known, by de Kooning. What does painterly mean? And then he says, answering himself, that you can see it's done with a brush. And then on your website, landscape is inescapably political. It can also be achingly beautiful. I find working with this imagery is the best way for me to engage with the material of paint and the ongoing complexity of human history as it pertains to the land. And when PBS did their profile of you, you talk about how you're trying not to hide how the paintings are being made, so that we intentionally see the construction of the paintings as we view the final product of the paintings, the brush strokes and the scrapes. And I wondered if you could bring that into the Elegy exhibition for us.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if you're a painter, you know that painting is one of the most seductive actions that you can do, in terms of making. It's immediately just sensual, excuse me. And, I've been painting a long time, I don't know, 40, 45 years now. And it has always been the case that with all the work that I make, even if it contains images, the engagement with the materials has been the way the images have been arrived at. So the engagement with the materials lasts a long time. That part lasts a long time. Anytime that I've had an image in mind that I wanted to arrive at, it's usually not been successful to think ahead of time. This is the picture I want to make, and I'll use these materials to do that. Usually the way it works when things are successful, this is the arena in which I want to operate. This is the language that I want to speak in that arena, and I'm going to trust that this process will take me somewhere over there, and I'll recognize, even if I don't get where I thought I wanted to go, I'll recognize that I'm where I'm supposed to go. It's like that. So there's a lot of unknown in that way of working. I find anytime that I try and know too much, I'm not very successful in the end result. Many people might think they might like the end result in that regard on some level, but it doesn't satisfy me, you know? It's like the difference between illustrating an idea and illuminating an idea. If you can really fix things in place that explains everything in an illustrative way, you get the message across, but you don't necessarily feel the weight of it, you know? But if you can illuminate that thought, if you can get people, if you can get yourself, I guess I do it for myself, not for you. If I can get myself into that place where the thing has been illuminated, then that's all I want to hope for. That's, you know, I'm doing well.
Yeah. Well, maybe to extend this question of illustration versus illumination, the description around Elegy, I just want to read a couple sentences. A painting like a poem will point you in the direction of the thing that needs to be seen. A placard like a prayer demands our attention. Yesterday like tomorrow, but most urgently today is the time for open eyes and action. The squares in this cycle act singly and collectively as poem, placard, prayer. And I'm interested in this line that a painting like a poem will point you in the direction of the thing that needs to be seen, because in a way it feels like your work historically could be viewed as looking away from a perceived image that would then suggest that maybe what needs to be seen isn't by the eye. I'm not sure. But I'm going to read a couple things from past and ask you maybe to think with me about what it means that a painting points you to what needs to be seen. Because in your work 20 years ago, Terra Incognita, you're shooting slides out the window of your car, often not looking at what you're photographing, and then later video, and then manipulating the video before you do the painting. The slides were an attempt to capture a landscape we are aware of without seeing or knowing know without looking. And then more recently, in the hour before, you're using Google Earth, and you're going to places where there were acts of violence, Ferguson or the Bataclan terrorist attack in Paris. But the Google Earth's just showing you a very quotidian street corner. And so the dissonance comes when you look at the caption, not when you look at the painting. So in a strange way, you're looking away. You're both looking away in a way by showing the before or the after, which looks totally normal. But you also have to look away from the painting to see what you were looking at when you looked at the painting. And I wanted to hear more about, maybe this relates to illumination, that something is illuminated, but it's perhaps not illuminated through perception.
Well, that's exactly the case, and even the strategy. I mean, I hate to use that word, but it's a strategic way of asking the viewer themselves to be the one that assigns the significance here. You know, so like say I don't know if you saw the show, I don't know how many shows ago it was. There was a big painting on this wall here, Parkland, Florida. You know, and the title of the painting was Parkland, Florida, February 8th. What's Valentine's Day? February 14th, 2018. You know, and if you were living under a rock, you wouldn't know. First of all, you wouldn't recognize Parkland, Florida. The name wouldn't mean anything to you, except if you just came in and saw the painting, you might say, "Wow, that's a really big painting, and that's kind of beautiful." And it's and get lost in moving the paint around, and it was a really beautiful painting, if I do say so myself. And it was a big painting, and you could just walk right into it. And when you read the title, if you were available to think about it, the title would let you know that you were looking at the site of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, and that painting, I made it like within 6 months of that event. You would have realized that this painting is connected to the murder of 22 high school kids by a gunman. And you might have thought, oh, I don't like this painting anymore. You know, it's not a beautiful painting. This is a horrific, you know what I mean? So the painting didn't change. The title didn't change. What changed was one's willingness to enter into that space, to engage with it. And it's not dissimilar from this. I'm not telling you what to think about any of this. Like, I'm not even telling you if I think there's a right or a wrong side in this, in what's going on here.
Right.
But I am asking that you recognize that your openness is the thing that assigns the meaning and assigns the connection and allows maybe for a slowing down to think about it. You know what I mean? We're so responsive. You know, we're all so, we're all in such response and so defended. And, you know, that on some level, if you just recognize that on an individual, one person at a time, on an individual basis, if you were able to slow down and really take this in, there might be a crack and a movement forward, you know?
Well, in the hour before
Yeah.
with Google Earth,
Yeah.
I also read that you used images that were black and white, and that then you either had to recall the colors or imagine colors that you wanted to be in the black and white. And it made me wonder, particularly in the 11 paintings that were done in silence, if there's something you hold in your mind's eye, the way you might conjure something, or whether even eye is the right organ of to even be thinking of.
Yeah, zero, nothing in the thinking, no image, no particular event being just chewed over in the process. It literally is each painting asked me to engage with it. It sounds really woo-woo, you know, when you talk about it like that, but each painting asked me to engage with it in an earnest and loving way, you know, like be with me and allow me to become, you know, this really sounds weird. But it's like a channeling, and it's not how I normally think of the way that I work, you know, but that insistence of leaving behind imagery, that wasn't me thinking, oh, I've got an idea, I'm going to leave behind imagery, you know, that was not the case. It was as if, like, when it shows up, do not allow it in, you know, because there is no way to know where you are in this, you know. Daniel picked up on that, made the comment that, you know, these look just like your paintings, but there's no horizon line, you know, and that horizon, and somebody else, who was it, Judy's here, Cook made the comment once that there's each successive body of work over time, the horizon's starting slowly disappearing, you know, going one way or the other, until finally there's nothing here. There's no footing. There's no way to know where you are in there. But if you're in a frame of mind to enter the space of the painting, you're in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned to me when we were having coffee that you also had a constraint that you could only use the materials that were on hand.
Yeah.
And I don't know how unusual that is. So maybe you could tell us, is that a very unusual technique? But also, why was that a constraint that came to mind for you, that you would only paint with materials that were there?
You're going to love this. It's totally practical. Like, you know, this year hasn't been great for sales of work, so I don't have a lot of money to buy new materials. So I've got a stockpile of paint here. I'm going to use this paint. And it's literally is, I mean, I did replenish a few colors once I knew I needed more volume of that color. But a lot of it was totally practical. And everybody in here who's an artist knows that thing where, you know, I have this size canvas, I have these pencils, whatever the materials are, so that's what I'm going to use, you know?
Well, to maybe talk a little bit more about abstraction versus figuration, let's spend a moment with color. This is what it says on the Elizabeth Leach website about Elegy. In all of his paintings, color is paramount, and certainly in these works, as it is color that is asked to convey the soul of each artwork. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit to how you're engaging with color. It seems to me like an impossible question, but maybe we could walk around in that question a little bit about color.
Well, let me ask you to identify a particular painting that color confuses you. And
That confuses me?
yeah, or engages you, or attracts you, or repels you.
Yeah. Well, I would say, okay, let me look. The one I feel most rejected by is the lime green one.
Okay.
It's not I don't have a dislike. I feel pushed out of the painting, let's say,
Okay.
with that painting.
Okay. So this painting, the title of which is Hamsa, which means 5 in Arabic. And by the way, I don't think we've mentioned it, but the titles of the paintings are just numbers, 1, 2, 3 through 12. But I've named them in the Arabic language. Partly it's a poetic sound when you say it out loud. It's beautiful to hear. Partly it's a really dehumanizing way of identifying something. There's nothing poetic about the fact that these are the numbers 1 through 12, But then it is important that they're 1 through 12 because of other connections. So 5 over here, Hamsa, is it's a, how do I say it? The color is conscious in there. It began as a orange, sienna, burnt sienna, cadmium, yellow deep. If you're a painter, you know these colors. Just the whole thing became that, and leaning more towards these sort of siennas and burnt siennas and browns and reddish browns. And at one point, I realized I had 2 tubes of this green, and with not knowing what was going to happen, I just made a couple of stripes across. And similar to avoiding imagery, I tried to avoid aesthetic beauty, if that's weird to hear, but I tried not to make choices based on this is really beautiful to look at, so I just started covering it with that green and realized that brown underneath, the underpainting striking through, really activated that green on top. And where the green was thin, where the green was thick, I got less green and more green, and I got less depth and more depth. And I got this scrim. This felt like this scrim over the whole thing. So I don't know what your experience is in looking at it, but to me, I want to go past that green into that other space back there. And I'm not allowed to go in there. I can't go in there, but I know that there's another space back there, So, I mean, it's just on a technical level, it's just the process of underpainting and overpainting. If you're a painter, you know these things. But on a visual level, and then maybe on an emotional and meaning level, not trying to put meaning into it, but on a meaning level, there's this side and there's that side,
So what's so strange? The next thing I wanted to talk about anyways was about representation, because even you just talking about that painting, I see much more depth in the painting than when I was just glancing around the room and picking it as one pushing me out. And now I feel like I can fall into the painting from hearing you. And one of the things that, just to bring this back to poetry briefly, is that a lot of even really avid readers in the United States are intimidated by poetry for some reason. And there are a lot of books written, like Why Poetry or How to Read Poetry. And a lot of it comes down to, I think, a category error about how you're supposed to engage with poetry versus a story. And that with poetry, like with music or with painting, you need to engage with it more than once. And one of the more satisfying things about sometimes when you're interviewing a poet is have them read a poem, discuss the poem and then have them read the same poem again.
Mm-hmm.
Or else, like, I know Daniela Molnar somewhere here in the audience, like I went to one of her talks about her work, and her pigments are harvested from places of great meaning, whether a clear cut or a dying glacier, or a concentration camp was, making pigments from the materials there. And when she does a presentation, you've seen the paintings, you listen to the talk about the paintings and the meaning behind it, and then the paintings never look the same again. Yeah. And with you and I, you brought me to your studio. Mm-hmm. Then I saw them here at the opening full of people. And then when everybody left, mm-hmm. 3 entirely different experiences. Mm-hmm. Linda and I were talking about how this empty room full of chairs made them look entirely different. Mm-hmm. So there's a particular aliveness to these canvases, mm-hmm. but you've done something more with representing them. Mm-hmm. And that's that people notice that some of them are alone and some of them are in pairs, which has a meaning, mm-hmm. But also they've moved, and they're going to move 3 times in the way that they've been ordered. So let's spend some time with like what it means to place them, mm-hmm. why they're placed together or separate, and then why they're also not in a static place on the walls.
Okay. Now, thank you for that softball. Appreciate that. So yeah, when you see the paintings like this, that and that we're habitually taught to think of as a diptych, this is a painting of 2 component parts. They're actually not diptychs, they're individual paintings that happen to be right up next to each other. So there's 12 individual paintings here. And if you came to the show prior to yesterday, it was not hung the way it is now. The structure of it was the same, where it was ... dash, ... dash, ... dash, in the Morse code language that spells the word victory, which is a really confusing word, message language, to send out. What does victory mean in this situation? But I wanted to have the arrangement, rather than be a static, this is what I want to say with this arrangement and say that word. I wanted them not to stay still at all. So yesterday, Daniel and Chris and Willie physically moved the paintings around so that none of the paintings is in its original location in the gallery as it was when we opened 2 weeks ago. None of the paintings that are next to each other are the same paintings that were next to each other 2 weeks ago. Things are forced to relate to each other. This pair is artificially forced to be next to each other. Same with that, same with that. Some that had the comfort of being paired are now sort of abandoned to themselves, have to be by themselves. I'm putting weird language on it, to direct the thinking. But the notion that there's not something certain, there's not something that we can think of as a permanent, anything permanent. There's not something that you can rely on, And if you come back to the show after November 15th, this will be changed again. And it won't look the way it looks now. Mm. So take it in, drink it in, memorize it. That quality of the same quality that I think exists in the paintings of not being able to find your footing and knowing that you can enter but not really knowing what you're entering with any kind of certainty, no hard ground to walk into, is the same quality with that uncertainty of coupling and abandonment, forced pairing. There's an uncertainty to that as well. And none of these these choices weren't made based on aesthetic decisions, or theoretically, they're not based on aesthetic decisions. But we all are finding when we did this, when we laid it out the first time, when we made the changes on Friday, that of course aesthetics is always going to be part of what happens. Like those two paintings over there that are paired together, my brother Chad over here had the great suggestion of those going together, partly because of the way they look together, you know, and as kind of crass as it sounds, that also is, you know, you can't avoid it. We want to feel okay. We want to feel like things are normal. We want to feel like we can embrace something that makes us feel good. You know what I mean? So while the topic might be really hard to hold on to, and the notion even of tying beauty into that, beauty is going to insist that you also count me in. You know, I want to be part of this too. I want us to find beauty too.
Mm.
You know?
Mm. We've alluded a couple times to the number 12.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the
Sure,
number 12?
let's go there.
Okay.
Yeah. So 12, at first it was a practical decision, you know. I could do 6 at a time, so I can do another 6 at a time. And then it became really evident quickly that there's 12 months in the year, there's 12 hours of the day, there's 12 hours of the night, there's 12 constant, you know, celestial shit, what do you call that? Astronomy, astrology. You know, there's the 12 tribes of Israel,
Right.
There's the 12, you know, there's so much that the number can bring a way to start to think about why, you know, why this? It was not an intentional to start off with, but I embrace it. You know, I embrace that number 12 for all of those reasons.
And when I heard you talking about the movement, it made me think also of like, maybe this is too reductive, but I'm curious about your thoughts about like how most of the people in Gaza aren't from Gaza. They're actually displaced people from 1948 already, and now in the last 2 years are constantly being dispossessed within Gaza and moving.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that constant movement of these
Is
an
related.
attempt to kind of speak to that a little.
Would you say when you rearrange things that you were doing it more emotionally or visually?
Well, for the first arrangement, actually the first arrangement and the second one, it was kind of done in tandem with other people's input. So it wasn't me saying this has to be this way. That's not going to be the case on the final one, but these first two. So some of it was like, oh, these two go well together, you know, as mundane as that, and as sort of
Well, visually or emotionally?
visually, I think.
Okay.
I think visually, yeah. And, you know, it's a very complex thing to show in a commercial gallery space work that has anything that goes beyond simply just visual, you know, allure, you know. So I don't know if we want to get input from others that helped with the arrangement, but from my perspective, I was open to suggestion from the people I was working with yesterday, Daniel and Chad and others, like, how do these work together? The only thing I knew that I wanted to make sure was that the original arrangement, the ones that were coupled were no longer coupled. You know, the ones that were diptychs were now singles somehow. The ones that were singles found partnership. You know, that was the only sort of proviso that I had.
Thanks. Which 6 did you paint in the first batch? Which 6 are in the second batch? Did you paint them all at the same time or individually? And did you learn anything from the first 6 that informed the second 6?
You know, at this point, I would say that they were painted simultaneously, all of them, with the exception of this one, which was completely painted all by itself without painting on others. But at this point, I can't identify like numerically, even though they have numbers. Those numbers don't reflect this is the first painting, this is the second painting. That was an arbitrary choice to just say, except for this one. And my process always is to work on many, many things at the same time, and it's not different for these. So you might see paintings that contain a color in a painting, and then you see it show up in another painting, because literally it was like, this painting is happening. Oh, I want to take some of this and put it over there too. You know, they're all open until however it gets made, the decision that I'm not making any more. I'm not doing anything else.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd love to reflect a little bit more on this idea of not letting the image through. And two of the things I was thinking about, you also used the word destruction. And one artist who came to mind is Gustav Metzger from the autodestructive art movement, and particularly his history series, where he uses very difficult images from the Second World War and blows them up to around the size of your paintings and covers them in blankets. And you have to lift the blanket and go underneath to experience the painting. And this is a kind of a way of, not letting the image through, but asking you to stay with it. And the other thing which kind of came to mind a lot when you were talking is just the word iconoclasm. And, thinking also about Judaism, thinking about what iconoclasm has meant in painting in relation to spirituality and religion, also in relation to Gaza. And, you use the word prayer in the in the text on this exhibition. So I'd love to hear a little bit more around that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This notion of a willingness to engage with the possibility of the meaning of work, I think resides with you, but it's not me to impose on you. Similar to that, put the blanket on there and you have a choice. Do I engage? Yes, I'm going to choose to engage. I go in there. It's not that different from this. It's not that different from reading the title Parkland, Florida, and allowing yourself to make the connections and then go there. I don't think that it's the notion of prayer. I use the word prayer in writing that little thing on the card because, first of all, who here isn't a little bit suspect of the power of thoughts and prayers, as a solution to the things that we have to deal with, right? It seems like a very easy way to rescind responsibility or stop actual action. So prayer is a loaded word. I was raised in a religious environment. I was taught the power of prayer, and I don't really practice that at this point, but I recognize that the word itself is a really loaded word. In terms of the iconoclastic, I think that was David that used that word. I don't know that did I say that? Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah. So I don't really know that. Connecting up the notion of a symbol to these is not anything I want to do. It's not an intentional thing, allowing the possibility of assigning meaning to the choices that I made, and you externally assigning meaning to the choices I made, I'm very happy to embrace that, Not necessarily agree with it, but want it to happen. Hopefully that answers your question.
I'm wondering now that you've gone this far into abstraction, if you're feeling a desire to stay at this level of abstraction, dive even deeper into it, or if you're feeling that next is a pulling back towards figuration. And then related to that, like, I feel like I personally, like, when I have a body of work, there's one piece that feels like it's going to be the bridge towards the next work. And I'm wondering if any of the pieces in here feel like they're the obvious, or not obvious, but that they will be an entry point into where you go next.
Not at all, zero. And again, I think of everything as abstraction. So even though these are non-image based, I don't think they're any more abstract than the landscape paintings that people are familiar with seeing, or the portraits that I have made over the years, or any of it. It sounds a little spacious to say it that way, I know, because it's easy to quickly identify with imagery and stay there. But as the person making this stuff, that's not the first thing that I'm thinking about. No, I have no.
I'm wondering now that you've gone this far into abstraction, if you're feeling a desire to stay at this level of abstraction, dive even deeper into it, or if you're feeling that next is a pulling back towards figuration. And then related to that, like, I feel like I personally, like, when I have a body of work, there's one piece that feels like it's going to be the bridge towards the next work. And I'm wondering if any of the pieces in here feel like they're the obvious, or not obvious, but that they will be an entry point into where you go next.
Not at all, zero. And again, I think of everything as abstraction. So even though these are non-image based, I don't think they're any more abstract than the landscape paintings that people are familiar with seeing, or the portraits that I have made over the years, or any of it. It sounds a little spacious to say it that way, I know, because it's easy to quickly identify with imagery and stay there. But as the person making this stuff, that's not the first thing that I'm thinking about. No, I have no idea, Anya, where these are, what's coming next. So Daniel asked me that the other day. So what's the next? No idea.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that, actually. Yeah. The show is, of course, paired with a second room full of monotype prints, which do have some representation in them. Want to talk to that at all in relation to the last question?
Sure. So those the prints in the other room. Obviously, there's some imagery that does get read, landscape-based imagery, and I guess I should talk about a little bit about the sort of an awakening of consciousness around the use of landscape imagery in general. For me, I mean, I first started making landscape paintings literally 45 years ago when I was living in Cyprus. I was fresh out of grad school. It would never have occurred to me to make a painting of a landscape painting because it was really not what was happening at the time, you know. But knowing no witnesses, I didn't have any of my colleagues around to see that happening, and it was just so freaking beautiful to be in that space that I just started making landscape paintings. And there's something about it that really engaged not just an itch to paint, but also a way to create something that was a beautiful image that you could engage with. And it's only been in the last 10, 12 years or so that I've realized that I have avoided engaging with the meaning, the exploitative nature of that, of taking imagery that is so beautiful to engage with, and you can just stay and live in that beauty, and to reconcile that with, as these prints are trying to do, reconcile that with the fact that all that beauty isn't really mine to take advantage of, you know. we as a nation haven't reconciled the violence that the violence with which this nation was founded, the people who were pushed off the land, that the land was stolen from, that there hasn't been a reconciliation, and I'll admit it, I'm really sorry that it's taken me a long time to come to that, but I don't think it's ever too late to realize that something has to shift here, obviously. So these paintings, these prints in here are collectively called Wild Beauty. Each of them has their own subtitle, and they are prints that I made based in response to images that were photographically made by photographers like Carlton Watkin and Curtis, and I forget his first name, and were part of an exhibition that Terry Totemeyer and John Larson put on at the Portland Art Museum in 2008 or 2009, maybe 2008, and they put out this beautiful catalog for it. And the photographs are photographs that are images of the Columbia Gorge from 1850-ish to 1950-ish, somewhere in there. And when Linda and I moved to California for a couple of years so that she could teach down at Mills College for a couple of years, I left behind everything up here. The only thing I took of my studio down there was my printing press and that catalog. and I made a whole bunch of prints based, in response to those images. And I was responding to them because they were just so beautiful. And they were so, just the organization of the composition of them, the structure of them. And nowhere in there was I also thinking about, like, wow, this is kind of fucked up. These images are of, like, the spoils of war. And I'm enjoying that, So these, the exact same process of responding to those images, seeing the beauty in those images, recognizing, the mastery of that work, honoring the first reason that exhibition was made, that Terry and John put that show together at the museum. But this time, aware of the sort of questioning, like, who am I to do this? Who am I to take advantage of that and benefit from that? So, and Linda and I talk about this, like, how do we now find that we can do this work and have it go out away from us, go back, give back? How? I don't know. I haven't answered that yet. And it seems a weird sitting in the spaces around the walls of a commercial gallery, it's not the question that one would necessarily think you would be asking, but it is the question that I think that I'm starting to ask late to the game, and that I think a lot of us are maybe starting to realize that's a question we have to engage with. Kina, did you have a question?
So I've been thinking a lot about you mentioned commercial gallery, and so I've been thinking quite a lot about this body of work, in part because you sent out some mailers with a kind of accordion landscape of the images that we could kind of shape in different hexagonal or pentagon or what have you, sort of loosely circular shapes. And so in that, as I've been sitting with the miniature versions for the past month or so, rearranging it, maybe every week, 2 weeks, different light, etc. And then being here a few weeks ago when they were first hung and seeing the arrangement today in a different configuration, I'm wondering, for you, like, with this body of work, is there a way in which, and I know we're doing a third iteration of switching them around, as you've seen them in miniature and in now 2 configurations here, if there's a way in which you have started to also envision them in a different sense or setting or landscape where they might have additional meaning or incongruities, etc.
Well, I haven't spent a lot of time like really mulling that over in terms of what would be the ultimate setting, because honestly, well, first of all, addressing the fact that we are in a commercial space, I am asking my gallerists to find homes for these paintings. They are, in theory, not going to have the opportunity to be all together, you know. And it's weird because you could say, like, you hope that they're never going to be all together, and, you know, because you need to make a living. But they also, you hope they get to stay together because as a group of paintings, there's a certain power that they hold as a group. So those are 2 fighting things. But I long time ago came to the realization that as these paintings go out into the world, into other people's lives, and are separated from one another, they are actually in diaspora. You know, that they will always be connected to one another, but they are out there. They, you know, and that's not an unimportant metaphor. You know. So.
Hi. I guess I came to the show only knowing that it was going to be about Gaza and that there would be abstract paintings. So I walked in the gallery and I thought, oh, are these depictions in some sense of Gaza? And it was so interesting that in the beginning of the show to have that distinction of these aren't paintings of place, they're an emotional state. And there's been so much work about Gaza for good reason. But I think that this show is really, to me, speaking to me as like our souls, like our American souls have been totally vanquished and like run down, like, and that's something to pay attention to in the midst of a genocide that demands so much of our attention, but to acknowledge that our souls are just so run down. And what do we do with that? And I just wonder if in the process of creating these paintings, if you have any information that you received in that process for us about what to do with our very hurt souls.
God, I really wish I could answer that in the affirmative. I so desperately wish I could do that. Maybe what I could say to that is find your way to do that. You know, because to me, this is me finding my way to be able to somehow live with that. And that probably each of us has the ability to do that in whatever level whatever way that is, you know. But the reality is it needs to happen. You know, we need to engage. That's why it says on that placard, you know, there's yesterday, there's tomorrow, but really there's today, and really there's. Let's all be awake today. Let's figure this out today. Let's talk about this today. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's a desperation and a sadness and a sorrow, but there's also a call to some kind of action.
On a really light note, as a family member, do you have any more paint left for your next project?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I can get back to work. Yeah.
Each work is kind of an unanswered question where you've gone into the other room, as you said, the extra space, and you've taken the hard way, which to me is reminiscent of alchemy. And you're looking for something, but you're not looking for the easy thing. You're not looking for the landscape. And it got me to thinking about ghosts that are hidden and inherent inside of the work, as if they were a kind of unseen hologram. and continue to be unseen, like the unanswered question. And yet, as I kept thinking, I realized that in a way, all of these are a lens that are focused into the room to possibly a singular ghost or hologram in the center. They can be arranged in any other way, but there's a sensibility rather than a view. Has that perception altered your point of view of helping us to see? Am I making sense?
Well, I'd have to say that I don't think I'm trying to help anybody to see, you know.
Not even yourself?
I'm me, you know. Honestly, I'm in the studio making the work is me and the work. I'm willing to share and feel free to try and have a conversation. You know what I mean? I'm trying to avoid the didactic potential that always exists when there's an image involved, right? So the image, I suspect, I mean, after the fact of the process of making, I suspect that impetus to completely get rid of imagery at every turn, and it was insistent. It was almost as if a hand was pushing my, you know, don't do that, you know. That there is a recognition that me telling you what to think or to come away with here is not the thing that needs to happen. Me making the work is the thing that needs to happen. You finding out why this work is moving you is your job, you know? If it's moving you. If it's not moving you, then it's just, you know, there you go.
I'm going to say a question of responsibility, the ability to respond to the material, to yourself, to the audience, to the world. And I'm at the moment thinking of, if I have a gun and I shoot it, I can say, I'm just shooting it off. Am I responsible? And I'm asking that question of you. You're not just shooting it off. You are responsible, I think. And that's why you're so intrigued by the work you've been evolving through, the hidden damage that comes out as a landscape. And here you've even gone into the landscape to where it seems to disappear.
See, I would take that gun and instead of it being a gun, I would say you have a mirror. And, you know, if you hold up the mirror away from you, a person, you know, you have a responsibility that you're, using your analogy, the responsibility is that reflection is, somebody's going to have to engage with that. You know what I mean? It's not there's nothing inherently dangerous about that, but there is something potentially illuminating about that, you know? The gun analogy to me is more, there's something inherently dangerous about it. And I don't think that there's anything inherently dangerous about asking a person to think about what the reason these paintings were made, or how they came to be, you know.
I asked this question just thinking, and I may not phrase it right, but it's coming from love. I think about artists in America that view themselves as activists, like a form of activism, right, in making work, responding to the Vietnam War and that sort of thing. And here we are in Gaza, the situation in the Middle East, and with social media, right? Like, you know, we can keep reposting images of horror to remind each person, like, hey, this is happening, similarly to what happened in Parkland and that sort of thing. And then in 5 years, we'll be on to another horrific event, and so to speak. And so you being white, being far away from Gaza, and recognizing that position that you have, right, and making the work about it, that somebody had said does not feel like Gaza at all, right? Because they're beautiful, they're colorful, they're not horrific, but your experience behind the canvas is horrific. And in terms of the wording and naming them in Arabic in that sort of way. And so I guess, and I don't know how to ask this question, and I don't know, like, you recognize the structure that you find the work in. Where does it find yourself outside of the canvas, outside of the art world, right? Like your position in recognizing this horror, being an American citizen, I being an American citizen, paying our taxes and that sort of thing. What would you like to see outside of the canvas for yourself, and helping us understand the work that you make that is in response to the horrors that happen within the United States and outside of the United States?
Okay, well, that's a huge question, and I only come to this as a painter. I'm not a political pundit or whatever. I'm also, I don't know that I would call myself an activist, even though that might be a little, I might have to consider that. My wife and I talk about this a lot, about the need to really decolonize ourselves, those of us who have the kind of power and privilege that comes with a face that looks like this and a room that looks like this, and are trying to figure out how to do that. That's the best I can do right now. I don't know the answer, but I do know that awareness is burgeoning. So, and it will take that kind of awareness for answers to actually come. If you're not aware, if you just go through the world unaware, as I, with landscape painting, did for 30 years, 35 years, you can just take comfort in the fact that you're making something really beautiful and people are living with something really beautiful if they own it. But after that, then how do you then turn that into something that is helpful beyond just a little reprieve from ugliness, I wish I could answer that more deeply.
I think that's most of the questions, but I'm going to give this back to David in case there's something has come up in that. And then if not, we'll just call it good.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. And I encourage people to come back when the work gets represented. What's the date?
Well, November 15th is the day. It might happen on the 14th. I'm not sure. We'll figure it out. But right around then is when it's going to change.